Hi, Paul Slack. It's Good News Broadcast speaking to Dr. Jonathan Ellerby. Hi, Doctor. How are you?
I am quite well. How are you today?
Real well as well. And Jonathan is the Spiritual Program Director for Canyon Ranch Health Resort and has written some books, always about, I would say, spiritual awakening and just feeling a little bit more positive about your life and the world around you, and congratulations and welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much.
Return to the Sacred, Ancient Pathways to Spiritual Awakening. What is spirituality? Let's start with the small things.
Yeah, well, that's a big, small thing, isn't it? You know, I got to tell you, in my work, I either get one of two extremes when I use the word spirituality. I either get the little smile and a knowing nod, or I get a look of fear. And I think it's understandable. I think the word has become confusing for people today. Some people wonder, is he talking about religion? Some people wonder, is he talking about a New Age belief system? But I just keep it simple. You know, to me, and frankly, you know, where I work at Canyon Ranch, a health resort, I think they have the same philosophy. Spirituality is something universal, it's something innate, it's something simple, and it's basically our relationship to questions of ultimate meaning in life. So a person's spirituality, if someone's listening and you're trying to figure out what your spirituality is, it's basically how you answer the questions. Who am I really? What matters most? And what relationships are truly important? And if you just look at those simple kinds of things, you realize everyone has to come up with answers for those questions, and what we find is that the more conscious your answers are, the more conscientious your relationship to those questions, the more fulfilling your life is.
You've created here I guess, I don't, maybe you didn't create it, but a spirituality survey.
Yes, that's right. I actually did create it, and it relates to this conversation about what is spirituality, because I think in the modern world, a lot of people have lost their comfort with their exploration of their inner strength and their inspiration, because the whole field has become confusing and confused by what we see on television and what, you know, sometimes what, you know, some of the religious leaders or scientific leaders are telling us. So this simple survey, which is called the Spirituality Survey, people can find it on my website or at thespiritualitysurvey.com, is just 4 simple questions. It really, and it's all anonymous. It just asks people to share what their personal experience of spirituality is. It's 4 questions anyone could answer. And the goal is just to help get a more, you might say, accurate picture of what people really feel and what people really believe beyond what we're being told by some of the larger groups and organizations.
Actually, Jonathan has his doctoral degree in comparative religion and his ordination as an interfaith minister. And our audience knows I am as well an interfaith minister. So I'm very interested in the thought process here. And so the 4 questions are this, everyone. But you, of course, can go to see it yourself. But it says, what is the best name for God? Or some people don't even say the word God, right? When you think or speak of a higher power, supreme being, ultimate source, what name, terms do you most prefer? Interesting, the ones you put down. You have God, Spirit, the universe. That alone is not easy to figure out which words should you put down, right? That's an interesting question. Next one, so think on that. The next one here you wrote was, what is the most naturally spiritual place? Where do you most often and naturally feel a strong sense of spiritual connection or feelings of the sacred? Well, what do you think in that regard? I mean, is it, do you have to go nowhere, or do you have to go somewhere, or where is it?
Well, it's interesting. The options we give are a place of worship, home, work, or nature. Mm-hmm. For me, you know, I guess my answer would be at some level it's anywhere I go, but you know, to be more direct, I'd say for me it's nature. The fascinating thing is we have nearly 1,500 responses at this point, and the overwhelming majority of people say nature, which is interesting because a lot of people that are taking this are religious. A lot of people taking this do believe in God. Although, interestingly, I don't know that those same people, if you ask them at a dinner table conversation with a group of friends that they would admit that. Or they might come up with another word or something more politically correct. But it seems that, what this is starting to show is that people are more alike than different, and that people's personal spiritualities actually cut across belief systems. And I'd be interested for more people to share their voice so that we can see what the truth is today. And again, my website's jonathanellerby.com. You just go to there. You're going to find a quick link to the Spirituality Survey. We'd love to hear from your listeners.
And it's a fascinating subject, what we're talking about. What is God? Here's the third question. What is God really like? How would you best describe your experience, idea of a higher power, supreme being, ultimate source, and a divine father, a divine mother? That always is interesting when you say that. Energy, law of nature, consciousness, pure awareness. It's really, the important thing is that everybody has the opportunity to believe as they may. Wouldn't you say?
Well, I think it's absolutely important that everyone is supported in the way their own personal answers unfold. Mm-hmm. I think part of what supports people, though, is a sense of social permission. And the irony, again, that I found in the results so far is that a lot of people, when they use the word God as their favorite term for a higher power, immediately assume that means like a very Christian, very personal, very male concept of God. What the survey has shown so far is that most people still like the word God, but they're actually predominantly moving towards thinking of God as a force, as an energy, as a presence in all things, something that a lot of people might not realize, but something that's always been called pantheism. But you ask someone, are you a pagan, are you a pantheist? They'll say, no, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Buddhist. But when you actually ask people to describe their encounter of something sacred in the world, again, people more alike than different, and frankly fall into categories they wouldn't even expect.
In the book you brought up this was a little different than I had thought, or someone had said, and I was amazed with that when I was told. You have some kind of numbers of the different sects of different sects
right.
of the some of the religions.
Yeah.
The movements or branches or schools or sects of different. That's interesting, right?
Well, it is, because I think that it's funny. I remember when I did the research for that, I was astonished because, as an example, when people think of religious sects and subgroups, a lot of times they think of non-Western groups. So they think, those Hindus, they have a million gods and a million, subcultures. The Christian tradition alone in the last 2,000 years has fractioned into over 2,000 different Christian groups, different mm-hmm. churches. Mm-hmm. Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, Protestants, mm-hmm. Anglicans, Orthodoxy of all kind. And so it's interesting to realize that, because too often people think in very broad strokes, and they say, well, I'm a Christian. And they assume that means that they're the same as the Christian sitting beside them, same as the Christian sitting across from them on the subway, when the truth is the Christian sitting beside them may be just as different as a Hindu may be or as a Muslim may be. When we look more into the personal experience of people's beliefs, we find that the boxes start to have much less meaning.
Yes, it's quite interesting that thought of the amount of differences. I was brought up Jewish, and then everybody said, "Well, are you Reformed? You conservative? You Orthodox?
Right.
Are you where do you stand here?" And then within the same, Reformism, there's probably. The Reform person next to me is a different type of a Reform person than I am. And still, a lot of this is, I think, when we said interfaith, and when in our new seminary school where I went, that new faith, that interfaith was respect to all religions.
Yeah.
Do you see it in the same manner?
Well, I've been involved in a number of interfaith kind of panels and discussions and even roles. I used to be a president of an interfaith chaplaincy association. I would say that depending on who's listening or who's speaking, interfaith can mean different things. So for some, when they hear the word interfaith, they actually think ecumenical. They mean inter-Christian, denominational. Mm-hmm. For me, I think more like you, which means acknowledging all faiths and religions as having merit and value each unto themselves. And then for some people, interfaith might mean something that's more of an integration of different faith perspectives. But I think, at the very least, the thread that unites these different kind of ways of thinking of the term interfaith is this idea of tolerance and respect, acknowledging that spirituality is deeply personal, and what's most important is that people are cultivating a healthy and meaningful relationship to their sense of vitality and meaning and the sacred in the world, and are less preoccupied with blaming and judging and trying to fit themselves and other people into categories and stereotypes.
Nicely stated. The book, we once again return to the sacred ancient pathways to spiritual awakening, and you've broken the book down into the master paths here, 12 roads on spiritual awakening. And I believe I saw here you had four different approaches to the 12. And you have great poetry. Congratulations on your
thank you.
Beautiful mind-centered practices. Each one of the body-centered practices. Poetry is a passion?
Yeah, yes, it is, actually. It's the first writing I ever started to do. And if I thought I could feed my family by writing poetry, I probably would have published a poetry book. But one day. And I think that the lesson, that I would share from why I've fallen so in love with poetry is because ultimately it's an art form that reminds us that, all that is truly good and beautiful in our lives is really hard to put into words. Which means the minute someone thinks they've got the answer, it's probably not the answer. The minute you can completely analyze or capture spirituality or meaning or God in a book or a chapter or a sentence, you've probably reduced something that is implicitly mysterious and infinite into something limited. And so I love the artistry and the kind of emotional nature of poetry.
Your 12 roads for spiritual awakening, is this the same as the 12 master paths? Or is that
yes, that's right. So
it is the same. Okay.
So the way I put it for people, in case anyone's listening and they just want to...
Let's hope they are.
Well, I was going to say, and wants a clearer idea. Basically, the idea behind these master paths that you're talking about is that every person has a distinct spiritual personality, which means we're not all going to get it the same way or feel it the same way or like the same kinds of things, much the way we have different tastes in clothing and music and lifestyle. So what we find is there are 12 basic practices that show up around the world and throughout time as the most, you might say, popular, as the most time-tested and effective. And they basically fall into 4 different categories: body-oriented, things like yoga and movement and dance and song; mind-oriented practices like prayer and meditation and studying scripture; heart-centered practices like being in a devotional relationship with God or having a mentor or being of service in the world; and soul-oriented practices, which are ultimately about stripping away, the distractions of life. So it might be fasting or a vow of silence or tending to the dying. And so the purpose of laying out this framework for people is simply so that people can see we're not supposed to all be the same. It's okay to have different orientations. What's important is which your leaning is, and you follow it.
Sounds good to me. And the book is broken into that. It's body-centered practices here, so you would be studying ceremony, ritual, sacred movement, sound and music; mind-centered, prayer and meditation; sacred study; heart-centered, path of devotion; sacred service, guru-guided path, a master teacher; and then soul-centered, ascetic and death and to life, path. And then the last is everything is sacred.
Yeah, that's right. Which is an important point to end on, because after I'm busy separating the world into categories and saying, well, this one could be best for you, and this practice could be best for you, and here's how you create peace and meaning in your daily life. It's important to end by saying, take a deep breath and remember it's all good. That we can't. It's important not to let our pursuit of personal growth or spirituality or self-help suddenly become a new burden or a new cage that we're locked in. It's important to remember that it's ultimately about something liberating.
I love it. Let me ask you two last questions, because I love to talk with you, and we have in the past, and we let's just say this is another part one of many. But what is a spiritual program director for Canyon Ranch Health Resort, which is extremely well known, renowned for just like almost a utopia-ish place to go to. What do you do there? What is your role, and how does that fit into the kind of facilities that are created?
Well, and whenever anyone asks me what I do here, my answer is always the same, which is I'm still trying to figure it out. But on a more practical level, as a programming director, what that means is I'm in charge of creating specialty workshops and lectures, visiting speakers, special weeks, where we might be dedicated to exploring a topic like intuition or energy medicine or spiritual growth. In terms of my interface with the guests here, I do private services, so I actually do some spiritual counseling. I do a process we call Journey Within, which is similar to something that others may call shamanic journey, using sound, breath, guided imagery to help people access, their own, inner clarity and emotional process. And then we also do something called the Spirit Lodge, which is an interfaith form of sweat lodge ceremony. So I do a lot of direct contact and direct provision. And the final piece of your question was, and how does that fit with Canyon Ranch? Because, of course, we have a medical department, exercise physiologists, nurses, psychologists. I mean, you name it, we really treat every facet of health. And that's exactly why we're here in spiritual programs, which is to help people remember that we are more than our bodies, we are more than our minds, we are even more than our emotional state. We are something greater, and that whether you call it a soul or an essence or a spiritual self, that's really the awareness that knits everything else together. And when we are clear about those ultimate questions, who am I? What matters most? What relationships are important? Then we find our motivation and discipline for taking action in all the other areas of life that we want to improve, such as the medical, the physical, the fitness, nutrition, and so on. So it really does all fit together, and I think we've done a great job of kind of lifting up the other things that people come for at Canyon Ranch.
Well, you have a wonderful perspective, and you have a gift to be able to verbally state it, and in your book to write it down. You're really able to make somebody feel good and safe and open-minded to the world about us. So congratulations. My last question is, what's good news for you?
What's good news for me? That's a great question. Boy, I would say love and relationships is good news for me. And the reason why that's good news is because even in our hardest times, you can always reach out to someone. And whether it's a stranger, whether it's a family member, a child, or even a healer or a therapist, we are born into interconnection. And rather than running from it, which is really the source of a lot of people's distress, if we make the choice to embrace it, it's always waiting for us. And it's really always a source of joy and healing, and I think awakens that memory of the fullness of who we are.
Fantastic. Okay, Doctor. I always enjoy, big honor, get to speak with you. Thank you very much for sharing good news with us. Thank you.
My pleasure.